Hey guys, sorry about the wind. I'm just going to put that out there first. Of course, it's starting to blow harder now as I start to record this video. But as you guys can see, the Jeep looks a whole lot different now. Yeah, looks a lot better, doesn't it? Except for gaps. There's a little bit of gap issues, obviously. Pretty major gap issues actually, but I'm going to tell you straight up, that is actually the header panel that's behind this panel, behind the headlights and everything. Sorry, I'm trying to block the wind. The header panel was cheap Chinese junk, and it does not, well, it doesn't really fit all that well. Even this side's kind of screwed up, and this side's even more screwed up with this gap being big enough so I can put 3 fingers, or almost actually my whole entire hand in it, basically. So that's how bad that gap is, guys. It's really bad, but you know, there's not much I can do about it. If it's not right, it's not right, and it isn't right. But the header panel I had before this broke, and this one broke the few pin, and the one before it broke the same pin, and the one before it was already smashed for me. So yeah, what a pain. But obviously it looks a lot different now. Still looks a lot better, don't get me wrong. So that's all good to go. I think that's good enough to be sold. I did end up replacing the brake line. Go ahead and show you that. There you go, there's your new brake line, and there's the new fitting that I threw in there. I know it doesn't look that far in, but that we didn't have any other brake fitting like that, except that one's like, I don't know, like 2 inches long. So sorry about that. Holy crap, it's bright. Anyway, got that brake line replaced. Don't be afraid of brake lines, guys. If you have rusty brake lines and one blows out on you, don't be too afraid. Trust me, it could be, it's not that hard to replace them. It only took like an hour to replace that brake line, and that's long. It's because this Jeep kind of has a stupid setup for where the brake line goes, but most cars, in the front end at least, it's a pretty simple job to do. It's really not that hard, and as long as you have the, you have to have a certain flare gun, like a little flaring tool, so you can flare the lines. But after that, it's really not that bad, guys. So if you see a car and has rusty brake lines, don't let it be a deal breaker. Just say, hey, it has rusty brake lines. I'm gonna have to replace all these lines eventually. So if you're buying a car with rusty brake lines, I'm trying to give you an example. Just ask them to bring down the price maybe a little bit, because you know it's got rusty brake lines, and we're taking that account because 3 out of the 4 brake lines are still rusty on this thing, so we're taking that into account of the price. And obviously it's going to need a few other things before it can really put back on the road to be a daily driver, like a windshield, for example. But let me show you guys the interior on this thing. Look how different this interior looks here. I'm going to open the back door too. Excuse my cleaning stuff. I didn't clean it up before I started the video, but you guys can see that this interior looks a whole lot different than what it did before. It was full of stuff, just full of it. And I had already taken some stuff out when I shot the last video, so there was actually more stuff in this Jeep. This thing was, like I said before in the last video, this thing was a storage vehicle. And we had just a bunch of crap in it. A lot of it was actually thrown out, but some of it was saved. And I'm sure more stuff that you find in the boxes, the multiple boxes that came out of this thing, I'm sure more stuff is going to go. And I have never been in a vehicle that has had more change, pennies, quarters, nickels, dimes in it than this vehicle right here. This Jeep had so much change, I should say. And here it was literally all that whole entire bottom was just all change. All of it. and these were full to the brim. And then I opened the ashtray up front here. Let me just try to open it here. It's kind of sticky. That was full of change. So we had at least $5 worth of change, if not maybe more close to $10 worth of change come out of this Jeep, which, if you guys know, that's quite a bit of change. And that was in pennies, quite a few quarters, and a lot of dimes and some nickels. So, but as you guys can see, sorry, I just went on a little rant there. I just couldn't believe the surreal amount of change that came out of this thing. But there are a few more things. Oops, I left the key on. Doesn't matter anyway because this battery's totally dead. Like I said, it needs a new battery, as you guys can figure out by me just saying that. Definitely needs a new battery, but and I need to put the sway bar links on. Actually, let me just pop the hood here to show you that new brake line as well. And I actually ended up taking this hood off to fix it too on that other corner, or make it look better, I should say, because it isn't really fixed. Let me show you guys the hood first. There you go. It's definitely not perfect. I did that with vice grips. Let me just tell you that. I did it with vice grips and a hammer, and that's what I was able to get at. So it's not too hard to do crappy body work, because it ends up being better than no body work. But if you're gonna do body work, spend the time and do it. I didn't spend the time, but that's because this hood's screwed. If it was something like even a fender or something else, I probably would have spent more time, but the hood's kind of screwed anyway. It's got rust all over it, forming all over, and it's just not a great hood, and it's bent back here. So this hood's kind of screwed anyway, so I just made it look better cosmetically, and I'm gonna actually take some paint and actually paint this thing, clean it up and paint it white, because I have some spray paint from Derby cars, and that's what I'm gonna use on that. And I'll show you guys this new brake line. Guess what? There it is. And guess what? It's the original brake line. We actually put a fitting in between that brake line and the new one. And let me show you guys this thing. Look at this route. So it goes under the brake master and goes across the back there, across the firewall, and down behind the computer, behind a panel that holds the computer. So I had to take all of this stuff out, all of it. Coolant tank, the whole entire panel that holds the computer. I actually had to unplug the computer in order to get all of that stuff out of there so I could get to the brake line, which if any of you had done a brake line job, you're gonna know that's pretty ridiculous just to do a brake line. But, you know, it's just how Chrysler set it up. And we ended up having a fitting. It's actually behind, the fitting is actually behind the computer there, the plate. And I ended up taking out the whole entire line, cutting off the bad line, or really rusty line, and we're just replacing it with brand new lines. So that's how I solved that. Ooh, I almost just fell over that thing. Let's see, what else do I have to do? There's only like one more thing or two more things I really need to do to this thing, is change the air filter, change the battery, actually three more things, and gotta change the sway bar links if I can get, yep, there it is. You see, there's literally nothing there. Because the sway bar links, my father ended up taking the sway bar links out, the old ones that were ruined, and one was broken in half, I guess. And he ended up taking it out, and yeah, never got around to putting another one or replacements back in. He ended up buying one, two, I mean, a set, and they ended up being the wrong size, but he ended up buying the right ones and just never put it in. So I have them here, and I'm probably gonna go ahead and throw them in. That, or we'll just sell it and say, yo, I mean, it needs new sway bar links. We have them in the back. They just need to be assembled. But it's like that on both sides. You guys can see right there where the empty hole is. But yeah, that's pretty much all that needs to be done. I got very lucky with this vehicle. This vehicle treated me quite well with everything. It did have a small issue with all three of these lights being out. I thought for sure, because the statistical odds of all three lights being out at the same time is nearly impossible. Well, guess what? It ended up being that all three lights had blown out, and I thought it was something to do with the wiring, so I tore the air box out, and I had to drill out the three bolts that held down the bottom of the flow sensor, the air box here, and it ended up just being that these bulbs were blown, and I thought for sure, because the wiring that goes through here was full of just grass and mice crap, and I thought for sure he probably, that little mouse probably chewed through the wiring there, and he didn't, and just ended up being these bulbs, which kind of sucked, because that means I just drilled through three bolts that were holding the air box down, so now I had needed to get new bolts to put it in, and I ended up doing that. But yeah, that was kind of a pain. And then luckily we had all three bulbs here. We have a good collection of bulbs from derby cars and stuff like that, so we had all the bulbs we needed from here, so it ended up being okay and a relatively simple job. So alright, well, that's pretty much it for the Jeep, guys. I mean, this thing's been in my life for quite some time, way before I had this channel, 3 years before I had this channel to be exact. And it's kind of sad to see it go, but you know, we're not using it, and it deserves to be used because it still runs good and it still drives good. So alright, well, see you guys in the next video. Like, comment, subscribe, and bye bye everybody.